Welcome to the Bend Don't Break podcast. I'm Aaron Schweitzer, your host, along with co-host Laurel Bronze. This podcast is powered by the Source Weekly, Bend's locally owned newspaper. Our guest today is Tyler Neese. He is the Government Affairs Director of the Central Oregon Association of Realtors, or COAR, as we'll be calling it going forward to avoid the tongue twister. He's originally from Pennsylvania, has a master's in communications from Southern New Hampshire University, has spent much of his career in marketing and public relations, and is currently on the board of the Economic Development for Central Oregon EDCO, and been a part of various civic advisor groups on housing and recreation in the community. After this recent election, we're catching up with PACs and associations that have had an impact on the political process in some fashion, and that's certainly the case with CORE. So Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. Thanks, Laurel, for having me today.
So Tyler, what attracted you to working in real estate and coming to this fair city?
Sure. So, Bend is a place that's always been on my radar, as you mentioned, kind of in the bio at the beginning. Enjoy spending time outdoors, and I have some family in Oregon and here in Bend as well. And so I was at a point in my career where I was looking at other opportunities and happened to find this opening with COAR, and seemed like a great kind of natural transition. Prior, I was working in the healthcare space, primarily on federal policy in the Medicare, Medicaid environments. And so not unlike the real estate industry, subject to a lot of regulation, taxes, fees, and other things of that nature. And so, seemed like a great fit. And in a growing community like Bend, I was excited to be a part of that conversation moving forward.
Well, that's a whole nother podcast there on the legal regulation around Medicare and Medicaid. So we'll have to circle back on that one.
You'll have a line of people that want to listen to that one. Sure.
Right. So, I mean, the Bend real estate market is, quite the conversation right now. If probably under the pandemic and under the election, we have, why, how. Laurel wrote a great piece on it a couple of weeks ago. And what are you seeing in the market? I mean, I know every time someone probably hears that you're associated with real estate, they want to know how long it'll last, whether it's time to get in. So maybe share with our listeners some of that feedback.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. I wish I did. I'd be doing pretty well, I think. But
right.
Absolutely, it has been a very interesting market, and as I'm sure both of you know, it's been that way for some time. Prior to the pandemic, we saw the market was quite hot, and then I think once the pandemic kind of began in earnest, if you will, sort of in the March-April timeframe, we saw pretty quickly an impact within the multiple listing service of Central Oregon and the number of listings. So pendings, active listings went down. And so what was interesting is, that was sort of the initial impact. And obviously there's, beyond the market, a number of impacts as well, of course, in terms of health and safety and just general kind of practices that our members needed to make sure they were doing in order to keep themselves and their clients safe. But
sure.
We saw
that didn't seem to impact the market at all, though. All the counterwashing and mask wearing and
and that's the interesting thing, is that I think that prior to the pandemic, we were already, as you guys well know, a pretty top destination for remote work, and right. I think now we've been dubbed a Zoom town. So I think as more people have the flexibility to work remotely, bring their jobs with them, we've seen even more demand. There was sort of this period, I think, where a lot of people were hesitant to sell and even buy because of market forces and economic uncertainty, and
sure.
then I think as time went on and people started to, become mobile again, started to relocate here, and we've seen a significant uptick in demand on the residential side. Now, I think something that's interesting to note is that even in those periods where we saw, listings come down, we saw pendings come down, the median price really remained flat, and that's a direct result of us having very low inventory, very low supply.
Sure.
Maybe just in Deschutes County and in Bend, maybe a percentage or less adjustment, but it really remained flat, and now it's starting to go up. Again because of that high demand.
Is it true that a lack of lower end inventory will impact the median home price? Or does that adjustment skew for those kind of sales? Because I know we're selling a lot of higher income homes as compared to where we don't have a lot of inventory in lower income homes. What can you speak to that?
Yeah, it is. Inventory really drives a lot of things, and it's as you mentioned, we have supply. I think our supply picture looks different at different price points, and as you said before, that might be a whole other podcast we want to talk about. Why housing is so expensive, but
Right.
a lot of it really does come down to supply. I mean, to kind of give you an idea, in our industry, 6 months is generally considered a healthy supply of housing. So at that point, you're going to see sort of moderate price appreciation. Excuse me. When you get much lower than 6 months, that's where you'll see more rapid increases in price. Currently, we're at 3.9 months of supply in Bend for all housing types. So that's single family, all residential.
Sure.
If you drill down a little further, we're at 3.2 for single family specifically. Single family homes in what might be, considered that middle market category of 300,000 to 400,000, we're at 1.9 months. So, the supply picture is pretty bleak, quite frankly.
Right.
And that is a significant contributor to cost. That supply and demand, the demand remains and continues to go up, but we don't have the housing to be able to meet it.
Well, probably the flip side of being a Zoom town is your commercial real estate side of the picture. So as people are Zooming like we are today, you do see more, you see people abandoning their office spaces and driving. What's happening in the commercial markets?
Yeah, great question. And I think you nailed it. There has been an impact. I think, especially again early on in the pandemic, commercial real estate has, I think, more complexity just in the sense that you have investors. There's a lot of factors involved versus residential, where market forces, the economy, especially, are impactful. So I think a lot of folks are really reticent to make those types of investment, move forward with projects early on. I think we're seeing that start to change. But yeah, absolutely. There's office spaces that are empty. Retail has been impacted certainly as well. So I think those are two sectors within commercial, especially, that have been impacted and where we've seen some change. But I do think that overall, in comparison, if we look at the numbers in comparison to commercial real estate, nationally, Bend has fared better. And I think, some of that is a result of, again, folks coming here. We're still a desirable community, even, on that commercial side. They still need to shop. Frequent businesses. If you look around town, I'm sure you've seen construction still happening on the commercial side, even, different office complexes and healthcare and things of that nature.
From your perspective, what are the politics of the urban growth boundary expansion, and how is it related to housing shortages?
In 500 words or less. Right there.
Condense it to a tweet. I'll do my best. So yeah, absolutely. It is, as you mentioned, Laurel, I think it is a very political process. As you know, whenever Bend went through the UGB process for this current remand, the 2016 remand, there's a number of parties that are involved, whether it's, landowners, members of the community weighing in from, kind of the neighbor perspective, and different groups throughout the community. So it certainly is a tough process. I mean, that was a 10-year process to get to where we are now, and very political. But I think really what it comes down to, this remand plan included both expansion areas and opportunity areas. So looking at areas where we need to grow in order to provide more housing and provide other types of development opportunity, redevelopment, things within the city, within the city limits. And really, as a result of the land use system and what the state requires, which is you kind of have to show us you're doing the best with what you can. You're densifying, urbanizing, infill before you ask for more. And so I think moving forward, it's really going to be a matter of, how do we continue to meet the demand? I think that those are two things, both opportunity and expansion, are absolutely necessary, and I'm speaking from the housing perspective, in order to provide the at the needed housing, but I think we will need, another expansion at the rate that we're growing. And, with people moving to Bend, we brought in 2,400 acres in this last round. We're already, we've used about 78% of the land in the current UGB, and we're still, a few years away from the end of that plan. So more land will be needed. I think it's just kind of a question of where does it best meet the need for housing and, the other growth needs that come with the city.
How quickly do you expect that you guys would start wanting to talk to the city about an expansion like that?
Yesterday.
It feels like yesterday, with being, I can't get over that term Zoom town. I'm going to use it all the time. Like we're a Zoom town now, so you got to expand the UGB.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to zoom in. No, absolutely. And I think that it really is, unfortunately, it's kind of a conversation that I think needs to happen on the heels of, really the previous UGB. You almost have to kind of start planning right away. It's something that not just us, but other groups within the community have been really, in conversation with the city about on a pretty regular basis, whether there's another urban reserve area in the works, so that kind of that groundwork and infrastructure is kind of, the groundwork's been laid and waiting in the wings for when it is time to grow again. So yeah, I think it's really an ongoing conversation, especially if growth is to continue at this rate.
You guys invested a lot into this political round. It seems like, it's something that with each election cycle, we see more. And part of that's being a Zoom town, I suppose, where you have more people, you have more dollars. And and you guys invested heavily in Piper and Livingston, and the sway of the election went away from those candidates, went more progressive. What were you hoping to achieve? What were the goals that you were pushing for through those two candidates, and how do you see working with the new council?
Sure. And yeah, it's, advocacy is a significant component of our organization, certainly not the only component. We provide education, we provide technology resources to real estate professionals throughout the region, and, work with a number of nonprofit and other organizations too. But on the advocacy side, I always like to say that why we care, why we have a government affairs program is because local government matters. It really does. I think that it's not always, pardon the term, but as sexy as, federal policy or what's going on in Congress or the presidential administration or even at the state level.
Well, it's really sexy right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just all the talk. So
yeah, that's true. You're right. Here
I would say local city council is probably sexier than Medicaid, Medicare, right on the sexy meter. So.
Most things are. No offense to people in Medicare.
Yeah. Right.
Most things are. You didn't think we were going to get here today, did you?
Yeah.
But no, it's it really at the end of the day, this adage we like to use, I think, in government affairs and politics is if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think that's what it's about is, making sure that we're a part of those conversations around growth, around housing, making sure the need is met. And so for us, that investment, as you said, in those candidates in Councilor Livingston and Councilor Piper, is really a reflection of, our support, wanting to see them continue, the good work they've done on council, whether that's being really instrumental in setting aggressive housing goals. So the city, as established their Road to 3,000, as they call it, which is trying to put 3,000 units on the ground by 2021. That, infrastructure projects and transportation that's been critical to servicing housing. I think also just really bringing some creative and needed ideas to the city in terms of building codes, looking at where are opportunities in the code for us to provide more flexibility to builders so that they can provide different types of products at more affordable price points, and just really being out front, I think, fighting fee increases and trying to keep the cost of housing down in development as we move forward.
What are some examples of legislation at the state level that COAR supports to make housing more affordable and accessible?
Yeah. So our jurisdiction, or our region, I guess, if you will, is Deschutes County, Jefferson, and Crook. And so our members, we have about 2,500 members throughout the region. And but we do also work with the Oregon Association of Realtors that takes lead on state legislation and support bills especially that are impactful for Central Oregon. So a couple, I think primarily one, House Bill 2001 is a piece of legislation that got a lot of attention. And I think it really was modeled on what Bend did, and looking at, how do we provide these different types of housing, more diversity of housing stock, changes to the RS code to allow for duplexes and triplexes. That's been, a big piece of legislation. We were supportive of those changes at the city level. House Bill 4079, we were very supportive of, which was, as you know, the pilot project for the city of Bend to be able to provide affordable housing, and a companion bill, a version that really extended that same opportunity to the city of Redmond. And Representative Zika right now is working on really trying to come up with a concept that would remove kind of the pilot component of that and offer that to more cities so it's not as limited, something we're very supportive of as well. In terms of housing in the more rural setting, outside of Bend, there's a legislative concept that has been introduced in the last couple of sessions around rural ADUs, something that we think would be a really great option. ADUs, I think, again, the city of Bend has been a leader in providing those, finding that they're a very affordable option for the community, something that can be rented out or used for family members who might not be able to afford housing otherwise here. I think being able to extend that with some sideboards within the rural county to be able to provide more housing would be a really great concept.
So the city council is considering an additional tax levy of 1/3 of 1% for commercial and industrial construction in Bend to raise money for affordable housing and homeless services. This would not affect new residential building. Where do you weigh in on this new law, and were you a part of helping to shape it?
Yeah, so we just had some conversations this week on our government affairs committee, and our commercial committee is looking at it as well. So we're reviewing those proposals to see where we'll fall. But I can tell you initially, just first of all, right off the bat, homelessness is obviously a significant issue in our community, and it's not obviously an easy issue to address. There's fortunately a lot of great organizations like the Homeless Leadership Coalition who are working hard to provide services, but it requires, they can't do it alone. I think it's a community-wide effort, and so I think my initial feedback is that it's an issue that impacts our entire community and something that everyone has a stake in helping to address. And I think that we have seen proposals like this in the past. I'm not clear on why it should be borne solely on the backs of commercial development. And so I think some of our feedback moving forward, as you mentioned, the one proposal that seems to have the most support on council is a supplemental 1/3 of 1% on the existing fee. So whether it's looking at sort of another proposal or different type of fee, or whether that can be spread out more evenly, I think that's something we really need to take a hard look at. A concern that I think we would also have is what kind of impact does that have on some projects that are currently slated for Bend? I'm thinking particularly of, the COAR area, or the tax increment finance plan that was put in place, and looking at what the vision is kind of for the central district and mixed use affordable housing opportunities there. Do those fees, serve to hamper that type of development moving forward? So I think that, but really the bottom line is I think there needs to be a process for input, both from the community and from developers who will be impacted, but especially from those groups who are already working with the homeless population to make sure that those services are located in a place that is really helpful for that population, that we're looking at a program that is going to best serve their needs.
It would appear that just on first blush and looking at this with the changing nature of the economy due to the pandemic, that putting a tax solely on commercial industrial as opposed to spreading that over to residential, which is just on fire, would make a little more sense. I'm wondering if that's something that you guys would think about revisiting, or if that you've heard any discussion of that.
Yeah, I think there's probably a number of different proposals that the city could look at, and it's certainly something that we would consider. But I think your point is well taken, that I think there has to be a way to more evenly spread out that cost and get input from the community versus focusing solely on one sector. I think we all have a stake in it for sure.
I mean, this kind of concept moves on the backs of what we're seeing a lot, where government services are being asked to ramp up more to provide for social services. And it certainly looks that way when you see the way that voters opened up their wallets for the library, for roads, and it appears that they're willing to do more in this area, moving funds around the police department. It feels like we're on the cusp of a serious kind of change in these environments. Are you feeling that? And how do you think that discussion is going to go when they start coming to your organization and saying, hey, we're going to put more fees on this, that, but the payoff is over here in social services?
Yeah, no, I think it really comes down to, those. So we're not, I would not say we're wholesale opposed to fees. I think a good example is, as you mentioned, Aaron, the transportation bond.
Sure.
We were a big supporter of the transportation bond and felt that, while it does, that is a property assessment, but we see, the value to the community. And that particular package we felt was really well balanced. I mean, it went through a thorough process of community input from, I think, a number of different interests, folks who were looking to, congestion and looking, for more, you might say vehicle-based solutions, as well as, pedestrian infrastructure and, walkable, bikeable routes. Really struck a good balance. And so I think that, fees certainly have their place if they are, well reasoned, and if they're going to be, providing the services that they are stated to provide. I think it's just putting together sound policy, and again, back to that robust public process to get a number of voices involved.
We were curious about inclusionary zoning. Can you explain what it is and what your position is on it?
Yeah, so inclusionary zoning is basically a policy that by definition requires a given percentage of new development is really allotted for affordable housing. And so our position historically has been that we're obviously, strong advocates for affordable housing. We're very supportive of incentives. However, when it comes to involuntary methods like inclusionary zoning, we have some concerns, and I think those really stem from whenever you put a plan like inclusionary zoning in place, you sometimes have the opposite of the desired effect, which is you may create a steeper entrance to market for middle market housing, or kind of non-subsidized products as a result, and that's obviously a significant need here within the community too. Is that middle market when we're looking at AMI, and so I think that there are incentives that can be provided that will still allow those types of projects to occur, and have, I think, very successfully in Bend. So incentives is where we always fall when we're looking at those types of projects.
Tyler, when you think about the future of the real estate market, and I know I'm bringing out the crystal ball right now and we're kind of rubbing it around, but it seems like there is really a sustained, from the people I talk to, it seems like this is not a bubble, that it is a more sustained, understandable rise in a desire to be in Bend. And that is kind of the nature of a Zoom town, is really what we're doing is moving people from these larger urban areas to our town. And I'm just wondering, and I once posed this question to the chamber a while ago, but how do you know when it's too much, when you're starting to outstrip your infrastructure? And, we know right now we're scrambling to find housing and expanding the UGB, but even, let's be honest, that's an extremely tedious and long process. What happens? Like what happens in the real estate market, which would be your speciality, but then how do you get the infrastructure these people they need?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that has to be a part of the conversation as well. When we are talking about growth, is we have to be able to service those areas. If we're bringing in, if we're expanding and we're bringing in new land into the UGB, we have to be able to service it. And it's not easy to do in Central Oregon. As we're on a lot of rock, and there's been issues. If you think back to like the septic to sewer conversion issue that came up in the city, there was significant cost there. And in order to provide those services. So that, I think that really has to be part of the forward-looking vision for the incoming council. And I look forward to working with them and, establishing those relationships and being able to hear, what their vision and plans are for housing. But yeah, I think infrastructure has to be a part of that conversation as well. In terms of what the market looks like moving forward, again, I would love to have that crystal ball too. But,
here it is. We're
that's
doing
right.
it right now. It feels like it's not going to stop. It just does. I mean, I know that's me getting in that crystal ball thing, but I just don't see us becoming less attractive over the course of the next couple of years. And I do think it's a concern. I think, we know, I mean, people talk about putting the brakes on tourism. They talk about trying to put the brakes on this kind of growth. And I just don't know if that's possible. I don't know how you do it unless you start putting billboards up that say we're a hideous, horrible town. And I don't see that happening.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, I think the only kind of strategies to curb demand are going to make the things that, we love about Bend not enjoyable anymore, right? So, but I do think, something you touched on earlier is that, this idea of the Zoom town. I think that, and I'm certainly not an economist, but I think that our economy has, diversified pretty significantly since, the last Great Recession. And I think, from economists I've listened to and data we have and things we look at in terms of trends, we are much better positioned, I think, to kind of weather those types of storms moving forward. I think we see that, from my involvement with EDCO and the good work they do, the types of businesses that are coming to Bend and the types of businesses that are growing in Bend, we really do have, whether it's, high tech or in healthcare, we really have a lot of pretty innovative, neat companies who are doing things here, setting up shop in the region.
Let me ask you one more thing before we let you go. Laurel and I had been talking about Redmond, and I believe it's a nonstop conversation that folks have about, the hub and the way it's growing and developing. And, my hat's off to that community for the way they've been developing, the way they've been allocating open space and their zoning and their restoration of their downtown and especially their public art to keep going. But I just wonder at what point, or if you're feeling this where, it used to be that Redmond was kind of, the little sister or brother off to the north. And it just feels like they might be coming as desirable as Bend at this point, especially for people who are zooming about. What are your thoughts about that? We were calling them the what was it, Laurel? The kid at the back of the classroom, the smart kid at the back of the classroom. Yeah, and Ben's always been up front. And now, they just seem like they're getting to be the cool kid.
Yeah, no, I think Redmond's a very cool kid for sure. There's some really neat things happening there for sure. And I think they've, and I can talk about some other cities in the region as well who are doing neat things. But yeah, as you said, whether it's revitalization downtown, they've been looking at their comp plan. They just finished that process through 2040 and really looking to, I think, position Redmond as, this city that is the hub, as they've said. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. I think some things that they've done that have helped them kind of get to that position. One, for instance, is their process and their approach to growth and looking at like an urban reserve area and having that land ready to go so that they could easily expand. And I think it has been a much quicker process for Redmond than Bend. Now, granted, it is, it's a different animal. Not all things are the same in terms of what they have to go through and different considerations and factors in that process. But yeah, definitely some neat stuff going on in Redmond. Madras as well. We have members in Madras who they just passed a package of SDC reductions, which we're always a big fan of, and everything from multifamily to single family to really incentivize builders. They basically found that building had kind of stalled and had for quite a few years. So they provided those incentives. They also took an innovative approach to urban renewal and establishing a housing urban renewal district downtown and kind of in the heart of the city, which has been really effective in putting some units on the ground too. So
yeah, I'm not really ready to give Madras the cool kid designation. I know they're getting a little more rowdy up there, but Redmond's chewing gum and looking sideways at the teacher right now, I think. So.
I'm gonna have to remember those. Those are good analogies.
Yeah. Well, Tyler, anything you'd like to say in parting before we end our podcast?
No, I just appreciate the time. Thanks for having me on, and look forward to chatting moving forward as exciting things are happening in the region. That's for sure.
Great.
Thanks,
Tyler,
Aaron.
thank you. This has been the Bend Don't Break podcast with myself, Aaron Schweitzer, and Laurel Bronze. Keep listening, and thank you very much.